Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss Labour announcements on their green investment plans yesterday, particularly from a communications point of view. Because in another week of disasters for the party of government, and they've certainly overshadowed a lot of this, Labour have to an extent got away with it, but still the Conservatives are loving it. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So, I've talked about my frustrations with Labour communications before quite a lot. And regardless of the rights and wrongs of their position on this particular issue now, and by the way, it's wrong, it's not going to stop them winning a stonking majority. So why is it so frustrating? Because they're not going to enjoy poll leads like this once they are in government. The Tories will change leader, rebrand, and because they no longer have their hands on the levers of power, anger at them dissipates a little bit because the focus will be on the new government. Labour will get away for a few years going, oh yeah, this is a mess because of the Tories. At some point before the following election, people will expect to see progress. Now, I am still confident that Labour are good for 2 terms at least, but given that communications is such a crucial part of election strategy, this failure to address fundamental problems with it worries me for future elections. Because the bigger issue yesterday was less the policy, although that is a concern for me. It was the communications. Like, I can't say yesterday was a good day for the Tories because Sunak's continued uselessness was actually giving unwitting cover for Labour's announcement. Labour have completely gotten away with it. It would have been a better day for the Tories if Sunak hadn't messed up so badly himself. Well, apart from losing another donor to Labour. And today's front pages are full of the green investment U-turn, full of it, absolutely inevitable, of course. But it's not just the fact of the U-turn, it's the way they managed it was so embarrassing. Like, I sat and scrolled through the news and social media sites, as I do yesterday, and I saw comment after comment about Labour's change of green investment policy. All very detailed. Oh, this is my opinion on this. This is why this is wrong. I'm thinking, Labour haven't announced anything yet. They hadn't announced a change of green investment policy. They were going to. We knew they were going to. And there were reports of sort of what it would say. We know that the reports are not going to be completely off the mark because they're based on leaks. But hours before a statement has actually been made, people were commenting on it like they were Nostradamus. Tory MPs, Labour MPs, journalists, general internet mouthpieces like me, only not me because I prefer to wait for the statements to be made before commenting on them. If I was Nostradamus, I would have won the lottery by now. But what it meant was that it made no difference what Labour did announce. No difference at all. The articles had already been written. The opinions already formed. By the time Labour made their statement very late on in the day, the news cycle had already been set, their words already written. Labour completely sacrificed their message to their opponents. It was so predictable. What they should have done was to make the announcement out of the blue, then agree to hold a press conference the next day to take questions. There's a reason statements like this tend to be made first thing in the morning, usually a Monday morning, because consider what's happening. Like I say, it's on the front pages of almost all the newspapers today. And some people may say, well, there's not that many people buy newspapers these days. No, that's true. The circulation's much lower. But I'll tell you what, they do see them. Because the front pages, they'll see those when they're paying for petrol. They'll see those at the supermarket. And Friday's a lot busier for that than Monday. You don't want people spending all day talking about what you're going to say before you've said it. If you're going to have these bad headlines, you don't want them on a day when actually lots of people are walking past newspapers. Cannot adequately express how absolutely every aspect of this fiasco was mismanaged. And the entire build-up was a mess as well. This was not a well thought out plan. How do I know? Because last week, The Guardian were reporting that the figure was likely to be dropped. And I was saying, hang on a minute, you're quoting a couple of anonymous sources here, but Keir Starmer said in an interview that the policy hadn't changed from last summer. Keir Starmer also responded to discussions again by saying that the investment was desperately needed just this week. Just this week. Shambolic for the leader of a political party to have made that recommitment if he even thought he would have to announce that it was being scrapped later that week. And because Starmer obviously wasn't trying to make himself look foolish, it can only mean that the policy was only adopted after a lot of arguments in the last day or two. Basically, as recently as the start of this week, Keir Starmer did not intend to make this announcement yesterday. It's the sort of roller coaster you've come to expect of the Tories. But not Labour. They've been quite steady in boasting a 20-point lead in the polls. Now, it is possible, of course, to look at Labour's statement yesterday. There are people who go, look, this is just being sensible. I get that. They're drawing a line under what was probably an unwise announcement in the first place. They should not have put a figure on spending plans when the election was still like 3 years away. Have the figures worked out, of course, so you can drop them into a manifesto if an election is suddenly called, but don't publish them in advance. But I think this was a mistake they made in hindsight. I don't think it was a ridiculous mistake. I certainly can't claim it was a ridiculous mistake because I didn't say it was a mistake at the time. I think it's a lesson to learn, but the £28 billion figure was not going to get them into trouble. I do not understand why Labour didn't fire back by saying to journalists, oh, you're questioning £28 billion worth of investment, which will grow the economy, but you're ignoring the tens of billions of pounds of unfunded tax cuts that the Tories are implementing this year. Why is that? Or the £140 billion of extra borrowing every year, which is not being invested in anything. Why aren't you talking about that? As for fiscal rules, the Tories are breaking their own fiscal rules right now. Why not shine a spotlight on that? It's like Labour are so constantly on the defensive that they don't realise they can actually attack at times as well. They're like a test cricket batter who keeps playing the forward defensive at everything when they should be cracking the short balls to the boundary. In fact, speaking of cricket, there is a saying that you should always do the opposite of what your opponent wants you to do. I've said before, this mindset applies to politics almost as much as sport. What Labour did yesterday was what the Conservatives wanted them to do. If for no other reason than it gave Tory MPs some respite from their own self-inflicted miseries, Labour should not have done it. And there are other reasons as well, not the least of which is that this green investment would have delivered a return and made it easier to get debt down as a share of GDP. The green investment policies are popular. The idea of borrowing for them is accepted, especially as you get a return from the investment. So it costs nothing in extra taxes. A lot of the public do get that. Claims by the Tories that it'll cost more in taxes are not really cutting through to people because they've lost credibility. All the polls I see do not suggest that Labour were right to hit the emergency brake on this. In fact, even this week's polling on it showed the original policy was still sustainable. It would be different if the Tories had been cutting through to the public on this, but they haven't. Consider that this has been described as Labour's flagship policy, and they've allowed that to be their flagship policy for 3 years now. It's really baked in. And Labour have been consistently 20 points ahead in the polls for now just over a year, whilst championing it. The reason Labour have made this move is a fear they might not be able to achieve it. And they want all of their manifesto commitments to be delivered. But the way they've done it is arguably more damaging than leaving a policy which might miss its target. Because what have Labour done? They've allowed media outlets to report that they're dropping their flagship policy, not just a minor policy, a flagship policy, which has been described as essential for the future of both the environment and our economy by Labour. But you can't criticise someone for now attacking this move. After all, the funding has now been massively scaled back. I criticise nobody for being upset at this statement, as long as they express that disappointment after the statement was actually made. And the Tories are saying that Starmer will spend the money anyway. So now what happens if in the next Parliament we actually do end up spending about £28 billion in a given year? I know from the announcement yesterday it doesn't sound likely, but what if they did on green investment? Those criticising this move today will criticise it again, and the Tories will say, well, we told you he's lying. I cannot get over how bad the messaging is from any angle you look at it. There was no way the Tories were going to use the pledge as an effective weapon in the general election campaign. I appreciate that Labour built up their polling lead with a very cautious approach, and you don't change that. People who keep saying, oh, the public are desperate to hear big ideas, they're completely wrong. They've been proven wrong time and again. In fact, the public are sick of big ideas. They don't want a government who promise world beating this or world beating that. They've had that. It hurts. They want a government who'll roll their sleeves up and just fix what's been broken. The public have been bitten in recent years by the grand promises. But all Labour have done is let the Tories accuse Labour of, just not sticking by anything they say. Because this was a big policy of how they're now having to accept that the Tories have it right on economic reality. And those who supported the policy that Labour will shy away from big decisions out of fear for what the Daily Telegraph might say. Ironically, the Daily Telegraph was one of the few papers not carrying this on their front page today. And I do get what Labour are trying to do here. I absolutely do. I see the strategy. Starmer is insisting that his policies are bomb-proof, by which he means nothing will trip them up. Labour are preparing not just for this election, but the following election. At that following election, Keir Starmer wants to challenge people to show him a 2024 manifesto promise he did not deliver in full. He wants to challenge the Tories, the media, anyone who mouths off at him. He wants to do that and say, what did I not deliver? In order to prove that he delivers it all, not just most of it, unlike the Tories and their 14 years of failure, so that he can then be trusted to deliver what might sound like grander promises in the second term. I get that. But although this is a joke, you know, there is political wisdom in it. I don't think any government ever delivered their entire manifesto in full. Yeah, it doesn't stop them winning the following election as long as their voters don't feel aggrieved by the policies that fell through the net. You know, don't fail to deliver the big promises, the ones that people really wanted. Like in terms of the £28 billion, you think, well, if they can't guarantee to deliver that, then isn't that a good reason to drop it? What people wanted was the move to net zero and the jobs it would create. As long as that still happens, you wouldn't be letting them down by the actual amount. Consider that Labour did not actually have £28 billion worth of spending plans anyway. If you looked at the green investment that Labour had actually announced, it actually came to something like £10 billion a year. So there was a lot of, we're just going to have this for investment ideas that come along anyway. But, you know, it's just like aiming for the stars and falling short. That gets you a lot more than just aiming for the floor. And whether or not the public judge you as success really depends on, do they feel better off? And do they feel that you delivered on what was important to them? People don't actually go down a checklist of manifesto promises. You know, they won't like it if you don't deliver something that they wanted. But remember, they're focused on outcomes, not means. You know, there's nothing wrong with your offer being a combination of promises and ambitions as well. I mean, what was to stop them? If they were going, okay, we don't want this to be a promise because we don't think we can meet it because of the economic situation. What was to stop them bringing out a manifesto of promises? These are our promises, this is our manifesto. And then a separate supplement that's a declaration of ambitions. Because Labour had already changed the policy last year to be an ambition. Why not keep it in that? If they hit it, great. If not, they say, well, it was an ambition. We worked towards it and we're still now having to work towards it. You know, they still get to say they delivered every single promise. As long as they make it clear what's a manifesto promise and what is an aim, that's because the £28 billion was already downgraded from a promise to an ambition last year. The main saving grace for Labour, as I say, is that it's not going to hurt them. The Tories are trying to make everything they can out of it. It's really not going to cut through. Even the BBC, you know, that's a major news organisation, and in fact, it's the major one in this country. And they reported it as Labour saying it's down to the way the Tories have trashed the economy since they first made the pledge. So the BBC have allowed Labour to put the emphasis on that. So Labour can at least make this U-turn about Tory economic failure. But when they're in government, they are going to have to stop blaming the Tories at some point and make sure they can deliver. The media won't cover for them like they do the Tories. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.